SeizeYourBusiness.com podcast with Tony Rourke and Kevin O'Flaherty.
SeizeYourBusiness.com, making you money.
Share it on Facebook, share it on LinkedIn, Twitter,
Our blog, YouTube, video, listen to our podcast, getting so hot that it's burning up the stereo.
Welcome to the SeizeYourBusiness.com podcast. My name is Kevin O'Flaherty from O'Flaherty Law. I'm joined by my co-host Scott Mathis from Plateau to Peak Consulting. And our guest today is Mary Erlain from Peak Development Strategies. She's written 3 books, Communicating with the 5 Generations in the Workplace, Effective Business Networking, and Building Strategic Alliances. And she also runs Peak Networking Groups. I'm not sure if that's the correct title, of which I'm a member. So I get to see her once a month at our networking group. Our topic today is going to be managing the 5 generations in the workplace. And actually, Mary and I are going to be doing a seminar later on tonight about dispute resolution for business owners. So that'll be after this is published, though. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
And I appreciate you fighting through a migraine to do this interview.
You can't tell.
Yeah.
You're holding up well.
I said offline that I'd take you on your worst day, before most people. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about this. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Peak Development Strategies was founded in 2007, and we'll talk a bit about how I've come to the expertise in the 5 generations work, but I work in one of 3 ways. I work as a coach, so I can work individually with business owners, wrapping a sound business around what they do. I don't really mess with their passion. They're usually very good at what they do, but running a small business has its trials and tribulations, and that's kind of where I come in. I also co-facilitate 3 entrepreneurs groups. There are 5 in the western suburbs and Chicago, and those are peer support groups where business owners can get the coaching from Michael and myself, but additionally, they also get the support from their peers. It's that place where they deal with the isolation, again, wrapping a sound business around what they do, and they get the insight and accountability, problem solving from their peers. So they grow together. And also I do training, speaking workshops on a lot of the I guess we'll call them the soft skills, the skills that typically people will take for granted and expect people to learn on their own, communication, conflict resolution, collaborating, team dynamics. And again, a lot of that also intertwines with my 5 generations work. And you mentioned my networking groups. This is a go-to-market strategy that I work for myself, but also provide alliances like you, where we have business owners coming together, and that business networking at the level we do is quite productive, and I've done that for over 10 years.
I love the format of your group that I'm in. It's not a leads group. You're not there to exchange referrals, and the thing I love about it is after everyone's introduced themselves, you ask everybody to go around the table and say something that they need from the universe, basically, other than their next client, which a lot of people struggle with. But you walk out of there and you take notes on how you can help the people around you or how they can help you. And every time I go to one of those groups, I walk away with 5 or 6 action points where I can work with the people that I met to accomplish something other than just passing business back and forth. And a lot of business does get passed back and forth, incidentally.
Right. That's the method to the madness, in essence. I'm listening for opportunities for myself. I'm listening for opportunities mainly for my network. Sometimes, I'll even hook 2 people up right at the table. And, networking isn't just about getting your infomercial. It's really trying to take your network and join it together with somebody else's network, because ideally that's going to circle back around to you. Hence why the heart and soul of the book I wrote is around that decade of experience that I've had with these groups, and I wrote it with that in mind.
Yeah, so tell me, go ahead, Scott.
Not having been in any of your groups or anything like that, do you mostly focus on small or any size business?
I've had Predominantly small to medium business,
Okay.
but I've had actually somebody who was one of the executives from American Express. I've had C-level officers in banks, but predominantly the focus is
Gotcha.
small to medium business with a B2B focus.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's bigger. The businesses that we see there, there's some, realtors come, attorneys come, but there's also people that are, putting in big solutions for, manufacturing companies.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
so it's when you say small to medium, you mean the classic sense of medium where it's,
Right.
Yes.
big for most people that'll probably be
Yes,
listening. to this
exactly,
podcast.
exactly.
So the entrepreneurs groups are different from your peak networking groups.
Mm-hmm.
And, I know a little bit about these, but the way they work is it allows entrepreneurs to be basically a board of directors for each other.
Yes, and there are confidentiality agreements, non-disclosure agreements signed, so that within this group, it's a group to work. It's not a group to network. Not to say networking isn't a byproduct, because when you're sitting around the table with 8 to 10 of your peers, you get to know each other.
Yeah.
And who else are you going to refer when somebody raises their hand and has a need?
Yeah.
But the key in this group is that it's that structure that we wrap around, which in essence becomes something that they reproduce in their own business. So we have a time to do goals accountability. We have a time to do issue and problem presentation and solving. And then we have a time to do best practices. And we stay within a fairly structured time periods in that 2.5 hours so that no one individual can run off and dominate the group. And it's through Michael's expertise in designing these groups and through our facilitation that we have story after story of success. And not to say that there aren't times where people really have some breakdowns. When business gets really hard or overwhelming, and it's kind of cool to see this band of brothers, so to speak, wrap their arms around a troubled business owner. Literally somebody at the brink of putting their hands up in the air and saying, I quit, to coming back a month later and having nailed all of their goals.
Well, it's really lonely and scary at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was going through that last summer when I started working with Scott. Scott's my COO, among many other things that he does. But I just, felt, man, I've got lightning in a bottle here, and there's so much rattling around in my head, and I need help to at least communicate it to turn it into a reality. And that's kind of what your groups do, from what I understand, is allow people to have, a band of brothers, I think you said, to work through those problems and not feel like they're alone wrestling with things.
Go ahead.
And sometimes it isn't that people are struggling and penniless. Business can be exploding and they can be making money hand over fist, or they've been entrepreneurs for so long, decades. We have members who have been in that role for decades. They want to learn how the people that are new to business, how they're supposed to do it. So we get a great cross-section of people in those groups.
What frequency do you guys meet at? I mean, how often, or weekly, monthly?
Monthly, and then there's a coaching session that you'll get with myself or Michael on the whatever off weeks, and that is just maybe something you feel uncomfortable with presenting to the group and just want us alone, or whatever is standing in the way, whatever that challenge is or challenges are in a business, whatever you can accomplish in that hour. Sometimes people just really desire that extra bit of accountability because a month seems like too long. So that 2-week point becomes an extra boost. And this group, they don't shy away from accountability. They'll be happy to call somebody up short and say, hey, I thought this was important. What's going on?
And a month could, if something happened, if we have the meeting today and something happens tomorrow, to me, a month might be too long. So, but I imagine as you get going, people will reach out within themselves and become friends and talk about it outside of class.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So in addition to all of that, in addition to writing the books, you also you audit people's businesses for gaps in their sales, I'm probably not describing that correctly, but elaborate on that.
What I've done is married that together with the 5 generations in the workplace. You know, there are companies that are doing quite well right now, but all companies have gaps, you know, where perhaps the pennies or dollars are leaking out.
Sure.
And it kind of comes from my medical background, where I have a diagnostic side that I get to feed, where I have a really great process as well as a really great nose to sniff out those gaps. And it's not like I created them. You know, I liken it to, you know, a painted wall. There's flaws in the painted wall. I didn't put it there. It's just that really when you examine it, you know, we can see those little imperfections. And this process that I also marry up with the work with 5 generations is a company sustainable as our generations transition. You know, the marketplace is changing, and a lot of companies just really don't have a handle on how to change that, how to handle it, what they're supposed to do. So what are the ways that we can build a solid strategic sales plan that we can implement going forward and know that our business is sustainable? Crossing our fingers and hoping we'll be around, you know, 8-10 years from now, probably not a successful strategy for most companies at this point.
Maybe sometime we can have you come back and talk a little bit more about that aspect of what you do. What you wanted to talk today was about managing the 5 generations in the workplace. So I don't even know where to start with this. I've heard your talk on this is very good. I'm sure there's I'm sure you don't have one canned talk, but you know, tell me about the 5 generations in the workplace, and you know, I'll ask questions as they come up.
Well, there's really 6% of traditionalists. Those are those folks that are born between 1922 and 45, and they still exist in the workplace. They also exist in our marketplace. Our boomers are 2 subsets, and there's the earlier subset, if we kind of split it by about 8 years or so. That would be the flower power, hippie, Vietnam, civil rights 60s generation, and then there are those that were born in the 70s, where, you know, we had Nixon resigning, we had you know, all the way up into Reaganomics, and this is when we were being most influenced by generational change. And then we have our Gen Xers, the latchkey kids, those ones that are very independent. And that's predominantly when the boomers either wanted to have a mom and dad or needed to have a mom and dad in the workplace. And right now, our Xers and Zs, most people aren't aware of the Zs. They're being kind of lumped together in one generation, but in reality, we have a whole different generation born 1990 and thereafter that have entered the workplace, and they're very different. Our Ys are taking their place, but also getting a real bad rap. You know, the word entitlement is used, and in reality, they've been very influenced by what they've seen with their parents, and they're not as loyal to employers, especially when they have student loans, you know, that have mounted, and frankly, whatever the jobs they're being offered are not covering that. Additionally, they've also seen their parents have companies turn their backs on them. And then our Gen Zs are let me back up. Millennials are more team players. They run in packs, where our Gen Zs, born after 1990, very individualistic, very entrepreneurial for many reasons. Opportunity, number one, had to be thanks to our job market, and also just their exposure. You know, when you look at technology has allowed them to be by themselves, yet always in touch. So those are our 5 generations, and if you just look at the span from technology, you look at the span of ages, there are drastic differences, and managing these people becomes a greater challenge every day. And typically what I run into is owners and managers don't really understand what to do when you have even 3 generations in the workplace on how is it that they're supposed to get these people to work together.
And we actually have 5 at the law office, and that's interesting. I haven't thought about it like that, but we do have all the way every one of those.
Wow, and that
it is interesting. We were talking about that today, and how they interact and how they do in meetings and how they manage.
And not surprising in a law firm, because I have another client who is also a lawyer, and they have one of the partners actually still has their name on the sign, is probably one of the best security lawyers in the country. But, come to think of it, in law firms, I would think that would not be quite as surprising as perhaps other companies because of the ability to have a very long career in law.
We've kind of stumbled into trying to figure out how to manage that. One of the Trevor, who edits the podcast, so if you're listening, Trevor, hello. He would be a millennial, and you just set him on a project, and he goes and he can, he'll figure it out. But then if he'll get frustrated when we don't understand what he's trying to accomplish or, communicating it to us. And he's working with our business development director, who is a flower power generation guy. And, they've got to communicate with each other and figure out how to, not have a communication breakdown. And they do a good job at it, but there's certain things where, hey, don't worry about trying to get the Google calendars all synced up. That's a Trevor job. He'll figure it out. It's just a matter of getting that line of communication, getting them to work together on it. Mm-hmm. And it's, it can be a challenge, but it's, what are some of the challenges that you've seen?
I think it's the desire and also the labeling that goes on. Another thing is that I guess if we go back and get a little Freudian for a moment, the word transfer, might as well. The word transference comes in, and what we do is we bring our parental and our family stuff in. And so let's say the baby boomer begins to talk to the Gen Y or the Gen Z as a father or a mother, as opposed to a coworker.
Oh, sure.
And we have the Gen Y and Gen Z looking at the baby boomer, or even an older Xer as mom or dad, uncle. And then when you bring the traditionalists in, it really adds a whole different element, because now that's grandma or grandpa. And what we really need to do is stop looking at people and assigning a label or an age. Those generations that I described, those aren't light switches. I'm a baby boomer, but really in the grand scheme of things, I identify with other generations more than I do my age. So I always liken it to the TV show The Voice. All those 4 judges here is the voice, the message. And do they like it or do they not like it? They don't know sometimes how old the individual is, what their ethnicity is, sometimes even their gender. All they're listening to is for the message. And if we could somehow do a little bit more of that, similar to what you described with your coworkers, and if we could have that desire to just talk to each other as people, but can be difficult. It can be complex, but that's in essence why I wrote this book, is to help build those bridges.
So what are some of the bridge building strategies that you lay out in the book?
A lot of it has to do with explaining the generational influences. Right on the front end is really having somebody understand the values, the things that have made them who they are. The traditionalists, the Depression. When we look at our millennials and our Gen Zs, we're looking at our recession most recently, as well as our United States being terrorized by 9/11 and the first World Trade bombing in Oklahoma and whatnot, and how that has influenced them. So first is positioning, and then within each chapter of the book, I go through the topic, communication, verbal, nonverbal communication, and then I break that down per generation as to what that might mean to them. So the last part of it has discussion and action points. It's not just a book to leisurely read. It's one to read with a journal or a pen in hand, because there's some questions that are asked that help you kind of go through and identify your own challenges as well as your own strengths. But I want to take whatever you've read and put it into real-time situations. It's not for the faint of heart, because it's really easy if I just sit and point at you two and say, hey, these are all your issues, but I have to look at what I'm contributing to the problem myself. And that's the purpose of this book, is to help me understand that why am I having issues with perhaps that individual? What is it in me that needs to change? Because at the end of the day, that's all I can do.
So can we go through some of the generations and maybe highlight what some of the either the best ways to communicate with them, or some of the issues that you're going to encounter with a stereotypical person from that generation, realizing that not everyone fits those stereotypes?
So a traditionalist has come, from the traditional pen and paper, face-to-face.
You said that was roughly
1922 to 1945.
Okay.
So, the radio babies, those that were not exposed to TV. So again, be careful of stereotypes. But these folks, before they leave, the best thing that we, as all the generations, can do is wring out their wisdom and knowledge. They are very loyal, very respected, and will expect and give respect. Right now, probably a little defensive, because their ability to cope and deal with all this change sometimes can be a bit of a challenge. But if we can get knee to knee, face to face with these people, and seek their desire and wisdom, even though it may seem antiquated, it may seem a bit like, corded phone and rotary phone technology. At the end of the day, the only reason we have smartphones to begin with is because there was that technology. So how can I take what they know and transfer it into what I do?
Sure.
Our baby boomers are a blend of these two subsets, and our baby boomers right now, perhaps some of them would like to be retiring, but they can't, thanks to our recent economic downturn. Our baby boomers are struggling because, sometimes technology is leaving them behind. They are, again, looking to pass on their businesses, and we have to struggle, if we're younger generations, we have to struggle with really not treating them as mom and dad. And sometimes right now we have the flip, where suddenly our baby boomers are looking at a Gen Y or a Gen X manager. And that can be some major struggle. So, speak to them as individuals, avoid bringing that transference, that mom and dad type conversation into it, because it just makes things complex.
But that's hard to do, though, right?
Oh,
yeah. Because it can be.
It can be.
You look at everybody, it tends to gravitate to that. You see somebody older, you want to help them. Oh, they don't need help in the workplace as it relates to that. But it could be really difficult. How do you help people in their mind get past? Because I'm working with somebody that's 70. I want to help them cross the street. I don't necessarily, not that I don't think they're wise, but I want to help them, not, the other way. So how do I, in the workforce, subdue that passion to help them and just let them be a coworker?
3 simple words. Did they ask? Did they ask? And that's perhaps what we need to do is look at them and give them the opportunity.
That's a great answer.
Yeah, did they ask? When we look at our Gen Xers, again, as a boomer, there are some people that don't know what to do with them because they're intolerant of bureaucracy. They're highly independent. They do not want to have meetings about the big meeting. They use technology to make life faster, better, easier, smarter. Not so much in the workplace or even for recreation. And we have to kind of harness that, create an environment where they can flourish, and you tap into that independence. Sometimes there are people that really want dependent workers, but then they have problem with the dependence of the workers. Where in this case, give them the structure and let them go. Create that virtual meeting. Create that ability that you gain the information without strapping them into an office. Our millennials stop labeling the entitlement. You know what? Work ethic for them. Boomers tend to be workaholics. The work ethic for millennials is I work to live. And it's just simply what work ethic means is just simply what the value of work means to an individual. Drastically different throughout the entire generations. And it's at Xers where we kind of tipped the scale and we moved away from workaholics into people that want balance. And our millennials are not terribly loyal, like I said earlier. They've got some challenges. They've got a lot of student loan debt, and they've also seen those examples. So, they're there to, if you can address their needs and help them, if you cannot label them, if you can respect the fact that they're highly educated and have something to offer and not look down our nose at them as, you know what, I've been around longer, so therefore I am smarter, better. No. If we can just see that they bring value and they have knowledge that I simply don't have because I wasn't raised during their time. And then our Gen Zs are ones that really struggle with communication because that whole face-to-face thing is foreign to them.
Where do millennials end and Gen Zs begin generally?
Gen Zs are born 1990 and thereafter, so 1989. Okay. So these people are 25 years old. They've never been without technology. They're able to socialize with their friends, which oftentimes is on a global scale. Like my son, my Gen Z, I had mentioned earlier, he spent a year at Oxford, so he made international friends. And social media and technology have allowed him to stay in touch with people I never knew on the planet when I was his age. So for them, they can kind of miss some of that nonverbal and what we take for granted in communication, they struggle with. So instead of criticizing them, perhaps coach them.
So is there a form of communication like, email versus a meeting versus just going up and talking to them face to face that tends to work to get the point across to a Gen Z person versus a boomer,
I think if you looked at the stereotype, it would probably be social media texting. But again, my favorite question is, Kevin, how would you prefer us to stay in touch?
That's a good point. You can always just ask.
And then make a note of it. Make a note of it somewhere in their file. And I do the rabbit ear quotes. The file may be a piece of paper. File may be a CRM system. File may be some app on your phone. But make a note of it in that, I was trying to email my son, and my son's like, email so yesterday. And, in this case, the Gen Z, I try texting him. He says, my phone's in my drawer. Would you please call me? So here is somebody who is supposed to be the texting, social media, instant messaging kind of guy. And that's just simply not the way to get in touch with my youngest son, who's 25. You got to pick up the phone and call him. So here is somebody who doesn't fit the stereotype. So that's why just ask somebody. And the best manager who, I know a banking manager who manages 13 very different banking center managers. And she will email 3 or 4 of them. She'll give a call to 3 or 4. She'll text. She uses the variety of communication, and they absolutely adore her because she treats them as individuals, not one collective group of 13 bank managers. And we take that one size fits all instead of perhaps treating people as individuals and meeting them at their preferences when we can.
Yeah. Well, and I know if I send out a mass email to my entire staff, it's going to be hit or miss who actually gets that information and who acts on it. It's almost, you say just ask, but if you ask me the best way to communicate with me, I might tell you one thing, but the way you're actually going to get through to me is a different way. It's almost, trial and error, find out what works. That's what I've found. If Scott responds to texts, faster than he responds to an email, then, keep
that's
texting.
funny. Our office manager, I text her, but Andrew, I email, and I get immediate response from both from very different types. And I found that Sam will immediately hit, a text back in a second. She may not answer the phone. She may be in a meeting or whatever, but it is interesting how they do all have different ways of it, and you kind of have to play it by ear or not play it by ear, but trial and error was a great way to put it.
I have somebody who is probably an older boomer, if I had to guess, who insists when we want to get together for coffee on calling me and doing it right then and there with calendars open. And I'm out on the road, and my phone is put in its little cubby where it belongs, so it connects up with Bluetooth. Yeah. And she's calling me, and all I said, could you please provide 3 dates in an email? And then she calls, and I said, I can't do it. So we never can seem, because she refuses to put the 3 dates in an email, and I can't be scheduling while I'm driving. They don't advise. I think it is. And so here's where stubbornness oftentimes gets in the way. If you ask that question, and perhaps maybe you can't do it all the time, the mere fact you ask the question, how do you prefer to stay in touch, automatically has buy-in because you're showing some interest.
Yeah, it shows that you care about them as an individual.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's funny you talk about scheduling. My friends will often try to do like a Facebook event to try to plan something for like next weekend, and I can't open the Pandora's box of Facebook on a daily basis. It's so if my wife wasn't checking it, I'd never be at anything. I'd like, hey,
same thing. Yeah.
If you want to invite me to something, send me a text. But it's everyone operates in a different way, and you got to figure out that if I want to communicate with those friends, I gotta be involved in Facebook at least on some level. So.
Or not communicate with them.
So what? Any other pearls of wisdom you'd like to share before we let you go?
Pearls of wisdom. I could be here all day.
Yeah, I know. We could do 5 podcasts with you.
I guess the one thing I would leave is to reinforce the fact that yes, there are 5 generations, but at the end of the day, people are individuals. So resist the temptation to automatically assume. And if nothing else, I've learned that with my own kids. I have 2 boys and a girl, but I technically have 2 Y's and a Z. And I see even the unique differences amongst them. They're 7 years apart. I have a son who still uses, the youngest still uses Post-it notes. I use Post-it notes as kind of the bookmark, inside a book to mark a page. I don't use Post-it notes. I have this thing called a smartphone. Exactly. And here I am, how many years older than he is. And, so we've got to treat people as individuals. And, but by the same token, understanding that there is this huge gap called the 5 generations in the workplace. The fact that our Gen Alphas who were born after 2003, they're turning 12 this year. They already probably have some influence in the marketplace in terms of buying power, but it's not going to be all that long that they're getting their first jobs. And so we have technically 6 generations in the marketplace to influence buying power. Right. And what is a company doing to get themselves ready for these generations?
Are Gen Alphas, are they if a kid is born today, are they Gen Alpha?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We're not on the beta
yet. We have some understanding of who they are, and predictably, how they're developing, but they still have a whole lot of influence, and we have no clue what's on the horizon. The events like 9/11 and depressions and wars and things. We have no clue what's ahead of us. But currently, they've never been without technology in any way, shape, or form. They're not going to live as long as, the folks that are on, ahead of them, because exercise for them involves the movement of their thumbs. And our food has changed. However, they will have a huge opportunity in the blue collar skills workforce, because those people are retiring. We predominantly have college educated people, so there'll be a huge opportunity in skills workforce for them. So if you think about it, the world will be their oyster. There's a lot to learn about them, but they also will be able to process so much quickly, and currently do. If you're around, my grandson happens to be one of those, and I just look at him, and I can even see the differences from that Gen Z into the Gen Alpha. Get ready; they're not going anywhere.
I read an interesting article the other day, and I thought of you. It was about how I was born in 82. It was about how there's a window between about 78 and 82 that everyone growing up during that time grew up at the same time that the technology we have today was growing up. So it wasn't like Gen X where they had to figure it out, as they were adults, but they didn't have to go through high school with Facebook, and the awfulness that would bring. They didn't have cell phones growing up, but they, we get the benefits of it and of knowing how to use it because we learned it as it was coming.
Yes.
Without having to have. We're the last analog childhood basically, which is which the article said was a healthy thing, and I look back on it as fondly.
And I can probably identify slightly with that, because I went to a high school that opened after we moved. The high school opened the year I was a freshman, and because it was a brand new high school, it had a computer. Now, the computer had a room probably the size of what I'm sitting in now, because it was so huge, but I, in essence, had the exposure to computers.
So you were getting in on that right as they were coming along too.
Yeah. So in essence, I think that's also influenced me today, because even though that technology is so antiquated, it was still exposure. Mm-hmm. And I then moved forward and was exposed to more technology, but I think that's probably why I identify with folks that are agile in technology, and I am pretty agile. It's because I didn't really have the fears that perhaps other boomers that did not have that in their teen years. I really was no fear because I had to use it for the grade. So, at the end of the day, it was either pass or fail. And I don't care how scared you were, of blowing the computer up. I got way past that in high school.
Well, if someone wants to either hire you to do a gap analysis for their business, or get involved in one of your networking groups, or buy your books, how can they find you? How can they reach you?
My websites. First one is the easiest. That's the number 5. Generations.com. So THE, the number 5, generations.com. That's where all the books are in existence, as well as they're on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Nook, and Kindle. As far as for my consulting and coaching services, that is my website, which is PEAK-D like David, S like Sam.com. So peak-ds.com.
Okay.
Or it's really easy if you just Google my first and last name. I'm probably like the only Mary Erlain on the.
Spell your last name for us.
Erlain like Nancy. I'm the only Mary. I do have a sister-in-law, Mary Erlain, but she's really not out on the web. So if you can just Google my name, it's easy enough to find me. It's unique.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks so much for your time, Mary.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.